preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
And also published by Duke, her two most recent memoirs, Beyond the Whiteness of Whiteness, Memoir of a White Mother of Black Sons, and Wet Earth and Dreams, A Narrative of Grief and Recovery. She's also the author of the novels Some Kind of Innocence, The Powers of Charlotte, Worlds Beyond My Control, and a volume of essays on loving men. Jane Lazarre teaches creative writing and literature at Eugene Lang College at the New School University in New York City. Please welcome Jane Lazarre.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming tonight. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I would like to introduce to you the person we're honoring tonight, Rebecca Walker. Rebecca Walker's work has appeared in numerous anthologies and periodicals, including the New York Times Magazine, Harper's, Elle, Ms., Vibe, and Spin. She has hosted television forums and produced segments for national television. And she's the founder of the Third Wave Foundation, the only national activist philanthropic organization for young women between the ages of 15 and 30. She has lived in New York City, and now she lives in Northern California. This memoir, Black, White, and Jewish, the autobiography of a shifting self, is a memoir about identity. It's about race in America, about being a writer, and about a young woman's struggle to name herself. It has many interesting, brave, and beautiful parts that we'll talk about tonight. So please welcome Rebecca Walker. What we're going to do tonight is have a conversation up here for a while about Rebecca's book, about some of the issues that she raises in her book. And I'm going to ask her periodically to read a couple of sections that I might choose or that she might decide to read on the spur of the moment from her book, because among other things, this is a beautiful literary memoir that she has shaped and formed with a great eye to language and to the shapes that she's trying to create and recreate throughout the book. And after we finish talking for about 45 minutes at this point, the floor will be open for any of you to ask questions that you want to ask and to talk to Rebecca about any of the concerns that perhaps the book or the conversation raised for you. So first, Rebecca.
Yes.
I want to say that I react to this memoir in a lot of different ways with different parts of my being, okay? I react to it as a writer, as a reader of memoir. I think that it's a very brave book because you chose to tell within the shapes that I was talking about before, some very personal and intimate stories. And I know from being a writer of memoir myself that that's a very difficult thing to do and that there are a lot of choices involved. So I wanted to ask you first if you wanted to talk a little bit about that and about memory, why you felt it was important to take your memories and put them down in words in the form of this book. Is that too hard a place to begin?
I just was running to get here, and I had such a hard time getting a cab. So I just got here, and I'm just settling in. No, it's not too hard. I decided to write this book and to be so frank and honest and naked for a lot of different reasons. I would say that the most vital or the most important reason that I wrote the book is because when I started it, I was about 25 or 26, and I was looking at adulthood kind of like about to smack me in the face, and I really felt that I needed to come to terms with my childhood, and I needed to sit and really remember the experiences that shaped me in an effort to process them, understand them, and then let them go so that I could live more fully in the present. I had a very deep psychic need, I think, to weave together all of the different parts of my psyche that I felt were fragmented as a child who grew up bicultural, bicoastal, biracial. I always felt like half of my life or a part of my life was happening somewhere else. And I wanted to have a tangible place, where all of the pieces could coexist in harmony. Because I felt that, all of my life it had only been in my body that they could all coexist. And I kind of needed the affirmation that it was possible, And the book became a kind of symbolic holding place for those pieces. I think that I decided to be so, people keep saying, well, why is it so honest? Why did you really feel that you needed to tell all the things that you told? And there were moments as I was writing that I felt like, maybe this is too much to share. But it was in those moments that I remembered my own experiences as a reader and how much I needed those very true voices in the books that I read, and the books that kept me company, and the books that were my friends. So I felt that it would be dishonest in a lot of ways to cover up or hide some of the intense vulnerability that I felt as a child, the intense pain, some of the experiences of coming into my sexuality that many people have been upset about. I felt that it was really important to be truthful, and that especially when telling a story about race, it would be easy to ignore all of the different subtle, deep things that happen underground. I could kind of live on the surface, but that would miss the whole point, the impact of what happens on the surface on the psyche.
Mm-hmm. I feel that there are two very different, then overlapping parts of writing very personally, in the way that you have, and also in the way that I have in my life. One is the part that you do for yourself, the part where you're trying to pull all the parts together out of the chaos that experience can seem to be before you get it into language.
Yes, and the other part,
and the other part
is trying to make something beautiful, and trying to make something that that speaks to, a more universal experience. Trying to make art, trying to make something that is living and alive, and is also in dialogue with all of the other writers who have chosen this form, over time, something that really speaks to the way the form has evolved. And I thought a lot about that as I was piecing it together.
I think the paradox that you've just really alluded to is very central to the form of memoir, and it's very clear in this book that you're very, as I always say to my students, you're very, very specific about the details and the intricacies of your own experience. And yet, on some level, the minute you sit down to write, you think about all those people out there who might be reading it, people you don't know. And what you're really hoping for on some level is that the story that you reveal about yourself, if you can get deep enough into it, is going to touch them even if they're completely different from you.
Absolutely. That's the goal.
Right. So you grew up in this unusual, in some ways, although there are many people like you in this country of mixed backgrounds of various kinds, but in another way, somewhat unusual family.
Yes.
Why don't you say a little bit about that family and what the relationship was, and also a little bit about the arrangement, the special custody arrangement that your parents devised, which then had this enormous impact on you, I think. Because there was a geographical distance that symbolized all the other differences.
Yes. My parents were movement people. They met in the civil rights movement. My father was a young, idealistic, handsome law student from Brooklyn, Jewish. and my mother was a young, aspiring, also beautiful, hopeful writer from the Deep South, African American. Both of them ended up in Mississippi because they were heeding the call of Dr. King.
And this was in 1968.
They got together 66, 67. It was illegal for them to get married at that time. Anti-miscegenation laws were very much in effect. They were run out of town several times. The Klan threatened to kill our whole family once I was born later. But anyway, so they ended up falling in love. The amazing, my favorite story about them falling in love is that they fell in love really over ice cream. My father was eating chocolate ice cream, which is still his favorite, and my mother was eating vanilla, which is still her favorite. And the story is that they shared each other's ice cream. And for those of you who know about intense racism and xenophobia, and that very seemingly small act of sharing food is very transgressive and powerful. So they ended up sharing ice cream and getting married, and then a couple of years later having me. And I really felt during my whole kind of the first 5 or 6 years of my life when I lived there in Jackson with my parents, I felt that I made total sense. I was a movement baby. My mixed raceness, the color of my skin, the fact that my parents came together and made me in love and not in hate, was a very powerful, positive identity, and I was a part of a very powerful, positive community of people who believed in that. My parents ended up divorcing about 8 years after I was born, and I think they divorced in many ways because of the rise of the Black Power movement. And the pressures that placed on their marriage. I think that the kind of ethos of integration was overridden by black on black love, and I think it was just very hard. They didn't have the support system that they needed. And so when they divorced, they ended up moving to really separate sides of the country. My father was in Washington, D.C. for a while, and then ended up in a little suburb in Westchester called Larchmont. And one of my favorite places, kidding. And my mom ended up moving to San Francisco, 3,000 miles away. And the custody arrangement that they devised was that I would spend 2 years with each of them in each different place. Which, I think that at that time they thought that was totally, the most progressive thing to do. It would be equal time here, equal time there. But the reality of it was that it was very difficult for me to move in between such very different worlds and communities. My father remarried and, married a Jewish woman and had a much more conventional family and lifestyle. My mother kind of got together with somebody from her old college days who was African American. So they both kind of went back to a very conventional kind of life in terms of race. And I had to find my way in between both of them because the context that I came out of had disintegrated in many ways.
You write very movingly about going back and forth physically on the airplanes every 2 years. And what's very clear in the book is that you're really traveling between what become two very, very different worlds. And one of the problems that you have growing up is that you have to find a way within your own body and your own self to somehow to get a sense of bringing these two worlds together.
Yeah.
And you're doing it at an age when anybody growing up is having a hard time with identity issues and trying to figure out who they are and feeling split in many, many ways.
Yes.
And I'm also very struck by the fact, as I am by many people your age and down to 20, and as you know, my older son is exactly your age and my younger son is a couple of years younger, and they're both Black and I'm Jewish. And so we have this mirrored kind of experience, except that they grew up not in a divorced family, and all in New York. But you're bringing all this together not only in your one body, but also in a very difficult time, I've learned as a teacher and a mother, to come of age in this country. Because coming of age in the late 70s and the 80s are a time when tremendous pressures are being felt by people in your generation, having to do with drugs, having to do with sexuality suddenly becoming a disease, something you can die from. And really a plague of drugs, not just drugs here and there, but a plague throughout classes and cultures in this country. And you're going back and forth trying to pull all this together. So I want to ask you, and you write about this in the book, but I want to ask you now, talk a little bit about being a Jew in Larchmont, being a black girl in Larchmont, who's sort of Jewish, but not Jewish. Talk about how you feel about that. But you use this wonderful phrase, sometimes you're a black girl, and sometimes you're a not black girl.
Larchmont was a very difficult time for me.
Yeah.
I was so I moved every 2 years, but then even within the 2 years, I ended up changing schools every year because my parents, both sets, moved even within those 2-year periods. So I was only in Larchmont for 1 year, and that was a year. You know, when I was with my brother and sister, often. You know, at Baskin Robbins or somewhere, you know, people would say things like, "Oh, you know, what a competent nanny," you know, about me, or you know, "Oh, she must be the au pair," you know. And I think it was things like that would happen in public, and then at school, the school that I went to was very much segregated. There were kind of the more affluent, predominantly Jewish students. And then there were kind of the more working class, lower middle class black students who came in from Mamaroneck and from other places into the school. And so I felt when I got there initially, and I had come to Larchmont from the Bronx, which was a totally different experience. I lived in Riverdale and went to this junior high school, 141. I don't know if any of you know 141, but at 141 in 7th grade, the dynamic was that the school was predominantly Dominican and Puerto Rican. And so my choice at 141 was to be either Dominican or Puerto Rican. So because I looked more Puerto Rican, chose Puerto Rican. And so I went from being Puerto Rican in 7th grade to being this kind of, I remember the first few weeks at Homix in Larchmont, I felt this incredible pressure to figure out where I was going to align myself or how I was going to move. And it was clear to me that the black kids were thought of as the troublemakers in some ways, and were kind of tracked, as many African American and children of color in this culture are, tracked into remedial courses and tracked into not the gifted classes. And the kids who looked like they were having the best time, which of course I was always attracted to the kids who looked like they were having the best time, were the Jewish kids. And they were completely obsessed that year with their bar and bat mitzvah proceedings. You know, it was like, that was what the whole kind of social thing was about that year. And so I, of course, did not go to Hebrew school, and so could not really join in with that. But I felt more that I belonged with them, you know. And so, you know, that began the process of trying to negotiate that space.
There's a very, and you and I have talked about this before, there's a very strong urge on the part of white Americans in general to deny their everyday, inexorable realities of racism. And there's a very strong urge, I think, on the part of many Jewish Americans to say, not only to agree with that, but also to say, but I'm not white. If there is racism, I'm not white, I'm Jewish. And there's an attempt to erase, in a sense. The way I read part of this book, there's an attempt on many people, at least in your Jewish family, to erase your blackness, to say, well, you're just one of us, or you're not one of us. But if they weren't saying you're not one of us, and we're sitting shiva because of your parents' marriage,
Right.
they were saying, well, you are one of us, and somehow the aspects of your identity that you saw as being the black girl part are being ignored. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that's it's been one of the things that's been so interesting in this process has been to hear what people say after they read the book. And one of the first things that my stepmother said to me after she read it was, and she said this, and it was so loving, and it was so, I think her intentions were so, profoundly hopeful. But she said, I just never thought of you as a black child. And for me, it was like this double, it was an assault in a way. But it's such a double bind, because I want her to be able to I want all of us to be able to have that reality, in a way. But yet, the truth is that I am a woman of color in this culture, and to not be able to recognize that is it's like a form of abuse in a way, because it doesn't recognize what my experiences often are. And I think as a parent, it's very important that we, and this comes from being a parent myself, it's so important to be aware of what your child is going to face in the culture.
Some point in the book, you're giving a reading, and a black woman comes up to you who says that her child has a white father. And she wants to know, well, what am I going to tell her? What is your advice to me? And you say, just tell her the plain truth. And I was wondering, well, what is that, as a mother myself,
what
is that plain truth,
Yeah.
especially when a child is very, very young?
Yeah.
And I think that I came around to the deep conviction that I would say to my children, you are black like daddy. Now, I also am Jewish and try to give them a sense of themselves as Jews, although I'm completely non-religious.
Right.
So there were some conflicts there. But what is the plain truth as opposed to that other moment when, if I can just refer to the book again, when you change your name from Rebecca Leventhal, which is your father's name, to Rebecca Walker, and you say, I don't remember your exact words, but you breathe deeply.
Well,
you say, this is the part of me that I'm most comfortable with and identified with.
Yes, at
There are
that
all these
moment,
layers,
yes. For me, the plain truth is that I am all of the above, and I don't feel that the most important identity to choose is the political identity, which is the black identity over the mixed identity. I think that pressure to choose one over the other has been the cause of a lot of my suffering. That sense that I had to be just one is the thing that makes me feel the most kind of psychically mutilated. And so the book really has been a process of getting to the point where I feel perfectly comfortable and perfectly strong claiming all of it. The moment where I changed my name, which is a moment that has come up again and again, mostly people it's interesting, in the Jewish press, people have really focused on that moment and felt that it's a real betrayal of Judaism. People have said, oh, you turn your back on your Jewishness and you claim your blackness over your And that was a very complex moment in my life, changing my name. And there were a lot of different reasons for doing that at that time. And one of them was that I felt much closer to my mother and my mother's family at that time than I did to my father and my father's family. But again, I think the most important point of the book is the final point, the ending piece, which says, I stand by those who stand by me. That it's not about standing by those because of blood or because of religion or because of any of those other signifiers. It's, who can fully witness and mirror back to me the wholeness of this integrated self. Who can do that with me? And those are the people that I can stand with. So the changing of the name moment is one point in a longer trajectory that ends up at, the integrated body. And I know you've talked about how your sons, and I hope, maybe they're here and they
One
can,
of them is.
okay, and they can talk about this a little bit, because I'm always interested in mixed people who claim just one side.
Well, here's
what that's
the
about.
question that mystifies me about that, and as an observer who's not mixed but who has a mixed family, and that I'm so interested in understanding how you think about this, that I understand the experience of being black as an identity. I understand the experience of being Jewish as an identity. Is the experience of being white analogous to those two? In other words, as one of my children once said to me about his many friends from mixed families, you can be black and Jewish, you can be black and Italian, you can be black and Nigerian and something else, you can be black and Irish. I have an Irish friend whose children are black, but you can't be black and white. In other words, she was saying,
white is too nonspecific.
There's something different here. There's something different here, not only on the social and political level, where it's most obvious that there's a difference, but inside. Now, maybe you don't feel that way. You feel the inside mixtures and the whiteness too? The Jewishness, the blackness, the mixedness, and the whiteness.
I think that when we talk about whiteness in our culture, I think whiteness is something that, one of the things that I love about your book, Beyond the Whiteness of Whiteness, is that you begin to do that important work of deconstructing just what whiteness is. And I think that it's something that we all need to be doing much more in our culture, in the same way that we've all been deconstructing what blackness is and what gender, whiteness is kind of the last frontier. It's been cloaked and, with under the guise of normal, as opposed to, it's a very specific, or can be, experience. I think that for me, whiteness has to do with a certain kind of privilege in the culture and a certain kind of access based on the color of one's skin. And that privilege is something that, that white skin privilege is something that is definitely present, I think, within the Jewish part of my family, whether or not that's acknowledged, and whether or not, I think, and it is still true that Jews have a specific history of oppression and experience of discrimination in this culture. But it is also true that often the whiteness of their skin allows a kind of possibility for assimilation that people who don't have that skin privilege just cannot have.
Yeah, I know that very personally because I come from a radical Jewish background, a background of radical Jews. And I know that I'm Jewish in my heart, in my soul, even though I have no religious observance. And yet, I also know from many years now, 30 years of experience, that when I walk through this world, even in this multicultural city, as a white person alone, without my family,
right,
I feel very differently. I just am one of the normal people, and people react to me that way. So the fact that I'm Jewish and the fact that I'm white are two very different kinds of realities that I have to negotiate as somebody who inside feels mixed at this point, having raised my children for so many years. I'm not mixed, really. Everything is, as Allison said, blackness is and blackness ain't. Well, everything about race is and ain't in this culture, I think. So it becomes very difficult, I think, and as you said, important to start to deconstruct this whiteness thing and see where it might be very, very different from these other cultural identities that are combined in so many of us.
I love that you feel mixed on the inside. I think that's beautiful.
A lot of people don't like it when I say that.
Well, I think that a lot of people actually feel that way. And it might not be racially mixed, but I think that sense of being consciousness, exactly. I think that there's something about being able to relate to both sides, or being able to really identify with those who are being oppressed or those who are being marginalized, and also identify with the dominant culture that is doing. I think that there's something about our consciousness that is shifting at this time. I'm hoping that it's shifting at this time, that can allow many of us, without having to have the biological experience of being mixed, but to be able to have the consciousness around, not necessarily choosing one side over another, and having the kind of swirling experience of being a child of the world, as opposed to a child of one single culture.
I think that the paradox of it is that the mixedness of one's consciousness can't occur if you're white until you start to understand what whiteness really is about and white privilege is about. James Baldwin wrote an essay called On Being White and Other Lies, in which he questions whether the whole phenomenon of whiteness is a reality or something that has been simply made up in order to call itself superior to other people and keep certain systems like slavery in effect.
Absolutely. I mean, race is the biggest, historical construct ever. I mean, what is race? What does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be black? What is it, and what has it been used for?
Now, there's another very disturbing and moving moment in the book where you go to visit your mother's brothers and your cousins in Atlanta. And you love them, and you're having a wonderful time with them. And then there's a point where, well, you tell about that section where they notice your whiteness and you wonder.
Yeah, this is the book is divided into cities as chapters. So this is in the Atlanta section, and I go as a young person to visit my uncles, my mother's brothers, who I adore. They're just the ultimate for me, because they're very, very kind of very uncle-y, and just they're kind of tough, and they're my Uncle Curtis drives this big white Cadillac, and they epitomize cool to me as a 9-year-old or however old I am. And I go and I spend time with them, and my Uncle Bobby teaches me how to shoot a gun, and they take me riding with them, and they're just the best uncles ever. And then at a certain point, I feel like I should read this passage. We haven't done any reading because I think it'll be better.
Do you know exactly where?
Yes, I know exactly where it is.
Okay, good.
How are y'all doing? Are you okay?
Yeah,
okay, good.
We still have some time.
Okay, because we haven't done any reading.
Right, I missed all my
You missed
points.
all the reading. Jane.
I'm sorry, we got carried away with the conversation.
But this is one of my favorite sections. But of course, okay. So you just have to imagine that before this, I've been on the backs of motorcycles, and my uncles have been teaching me about antifreeze and teaching me how to shoot guns, and it's a whole big boy moment. It is and then they take me out to this house in the country, which is where my grandmother was born, and we call it the old house. It is at the old house, too, that I first hear the word cracker, but I don't have any idea what it means until 10 or 15 years later, when I am really grown. I don't realize that it is a term black people use for white people, and which signifies the insanity, the cruelty, the maniacal culture of racist white people. Me and my Uncle Bobby, my cousins Robbie and Wayne, are sitting in one of the bedrooms in the old house, the one that has a big photograph above the bed of my granny, standing with all of her sisters from the Kingdom Hall. It is late and we have been shooting and eating and fixing the truck, but now it is dark and we are getting ready for bed by the light of an old kerosene lamp. The boys are making jokes and I am laughing hysterically, far more than the jokes call for. I am intoxicated by the smell and buff and love of these men I adore so. Delirious with the airy dampness of the house, the thrill of the gun I have held in my hands, the way I have flown over snakes and pressed my cheek into my cousin's back. And now it is dark and they are telling ghost stories, and the heady mix of fear and excitement and safety and joy and heat rushes through me, and I am full with a giddiness that feels like it is spinning me around in circles. I laugh in my high-pitched giggle, unable to stop, unable to get control of myself, to calm down, to get into bed and go to sleep. After 20 minutes or so of this whirlwind, my Uncle Bobby says something to the boys that I can't hear, and they start laughing too. What? I say, looking up into his beard, wide-eyed in the dark, reaching for his strong arms. What did you say? He turns to me with a grin as wide as my own. I said, Rebecca, that some people would call what you have the sillies, but we call what you've got the crackers. And my cousins burst out laughing. This is a word my Uncle Bobby will use again and again to describe me or one of my mannerisms. And my cousins do too, even when I am grown and doing things they think are strange or weird, things they think are not black. Even though they are just kidding and we laugh about it together, a part of me feels pushed away when they say this, like I have something inside of me I know they hate. And so even as we stand there together, I am struggling to find my ground, to know where I really belong. How do I reconcile my love for my uncles and cousins with the fact that I remind them of pain?
That is beautiful. And
it's one of my favorite
that's
sections.
The line that kept staying in my mind, the fact that I remind them of pain. A fear that I've had many times also in my life. And I guess, do you think that reminder of pain when you're with the black people that you love fades or goes into the background when things are in the context of intimate relationships? Because I think that in the context of non-intimate relationships in our regular social social lives, I think that the thing we want to deny but that is really true is that the whiteness reminds black people who see us who are white of pain on some level. But you're talking here about love.
Yeah, I don't know. In my personal, most intimate moments, parts of my life, I think that, people ironize that. It becomes a joke. It becomes something that we laugh about. Whatever it is about me that comes up at a certain moment, becomes like, oh, that's your white this coming out. That's your, and we laugh about it. And I think that's the only way to bridge that difference. Mm-hmm. And I think that if it's not laughed about, and if people don't feel safe, then it can easily go in the other direction.
Mm-hmm. Now there is a part, I'm not going to ask you to read another part.
Okay. But I'd like to say, I think that,
Go ahead. You go.
I think that...
I mean, it's about the same thing, the part I was going to ask you to read. But.
I think that, for me, that sentence was very important, because I have often felt in my life that my body reminds both sides of pain. That there's a way in which, for my father, to look at me was to remember a whole other time, a whole other very kind of utopic, rich, hopeful time that I think from his perspective has yet to really reach reality,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that brings its own kind of pain as well.
Well, actually, that makes me want to ask you about something else, Rebecca. There's this beautiful piece about memory and the conflicts of memory towards the end of the book that I want you to read, but we have some time left. And that is, when we talked about the book, we talked about it also being a book about being the child of divorce.
Yeah.
And I know that the book is dedicated to your parents, and I can say for anyone who hasn't yet read the book that this book is threaded with passion for both of your parents. And there are many scenes that are very passionate scenes in which you are your father's daughter, your mother's daughter, Alice's little girl. You're a writer. You're the daughter of a writer. So the passion is very clearly felt in this book. And yet there's also a lot of pain and anger that you talk about in the book. And I know that you wanted to speak about that part, writing a memoir about something like that, what that means to you now. I read that not only as a reader, but I read it as a mother, in which I feel maternally toward you, the writer, and I feel also very identified with your parents and the pain that they might feel because of the pain that you went through.
Yeah.
I think that would be the content of their pain.
Yeah, I think it's been hard, not just for my parents, but also my stepmother, who is a parent for
Your
me.
three parents.
My three parents, yeah. I think it has been very difficult for them. I think initially it was hard I think it's been hard for them. I think they still have yet to see the love, the incredible love that I hope is on the page for them. I think that they've had a hard time facing the fact of this part of my experience. I think the book has brought up all these different issues with people, friends, about the hidden life of children. I think they really had no idea what I was going through. So for them, they're kind of mystified by it, and I think they've reacted very sort of emotionally and personally. And they my father kept saying, well, what about all the good things? What about all the good things? And, and it's true, but that's not the book I needed to write, I don't know what else to say about that.
There's not only, when I say that there's love and passion for both of your parents in the book, it's not only in the form of simple declaration, but in terms of your own empathy for them. And there's this wonderful scene where you're graduating from high school and you're in a black world, essentially, of your mother and your mother's friends, and your father comes to your graduation. And
horrible.
And he's profoundly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's not just because of the racial difference. It's because of the broken family difference.
Yes.
And you feel such compassion for him in that scene.
Yes.
And it's evocative of another scene where he's taking you to visit a black friend, I think, in the Bronx.
Yes.
And this is in a section of the Bronx which is black.
And
you're worried about him after he leaves you off being just, you call him another white guy in the Bronx.
Yeah, an easy mark.
An easy mark, yeah.
Yeah.
So those kinds of stories, I think, really point to the connection that you feel to them.
Oh, yeah, I mean, they're my parents, I love them.
I
I think that they also, one of the difference is just in our generations is that they came from such extreme situations. My mother growing up in Jim Crow segregated South, my father being born, right around the World War II and growing up in New York and dealing with anti-Semitism. I think, marrying against the law, the Klan leaving cards for us, the violence of their marriage. I think they just could not imagine that I would have trauma. I think they just were like, well, what? So you move every 2 years, so what? You're not being shot at, you eat well. I think that they just, and that's been very difficult for me, to try to, so much of why I wrote this book, as well as all the other reasons, is to just be able to show them what it was like, because I think that they really don't have any idea. And I think often many parents who have mixed children have no real experience or understanding of what it really, The other day I said to my mother, I said, this is what it is. When you all decide to have a mixed child, this is it. This is what the experience is. This, it's not something else, abstract, magical. It's this. And that was, that was a big moment. And she kind of,
I have heard many white partners in mixed couples when I read and talk about this issue around the city, saying, especially when their children are very young, it's nothing, she's just like me, or he's just like me. And really there's a tremendous urge to deny, I think, the complexity of race and of racism that the children are going to have to face, however they come to terms with it inside of themselves.
When I did, Sadiq was here, we did that show, some TV show that we did in the early part of the tour, and after I did my thing, that one of the cameramen came up to me, a very sweet Jewish man. He said, I'm married to a Jamaican woman, and we have 2 Black Jewish, Jamaican Jewish kids, and they don't have any problem.
Yes,
we live in multicultural New York City. They, they're totally well adjusted. I'm so surprised you had any trouble at all. And I was like, and it was early in the tour, so I kind of thought, oh God, maybe I'm just the freak and everybody else is having a great time. And I said to him, I said, well, have you asked your kids if they are truly okay? And he said, I don't have to ask them. I can tell that they're fine. And it's that kind of benign neglect, that is very troubling. So I said to him, well, I think you should go home and really ask your kids, because I'm sure that there's something going on, even if it's not so painful. There's we need to be in dialogue about these things.
Some struggle going on.
Something, yeah.
So we have to stop in a couple minutes, because I know there are people out there who really want to ask you questions. But could you read one thing?
Sure. Reading's easy.
184. And this is a lot of what you've been saying anyway, Rebecca, but at the bottom, from This Is How Memory Works.
Oh, yes. Oh, dear. Yes.
Where you talk about a lot of this, and just stop whenever you want to stop.
Okay.
Over the next page or so.
Okay.
Page and a half.
All right. So there are all of these sections about memory in the book, and so the book is about, remembering, as well as being about being a child of divorce and being by everything. So we almost called the book How Memory Works, actually. This is a section called How Memory Works. Memory works like this. At the guard gate of an expensive hotel, I feel my breath speed up, my pulse accelerate. There is a moment when it seems I may not be let through the swinging wooden arm. For a few seconds, I feel as if I am suspended in time. Again, the proverbial deer in the headlights. The gatekeeper checks his clipboard, makes a few calls as I grow more and more disturbed. My thighs sweat against the cold plastic bottle wedged between them. My hands grip the brown vinyl of the steering wheel a little more tightly. My friends, sensing my discomfort, pick up on my paranoia. Some old white shit, one of them says, disgusted. The other, the one who reminds me later when I am back to myself and smiling, strolling as if without a care, that this is routine and not personal, says nothing. He takes no sides, looks blankly out the backseat window. This is how memory works. I am a woman who lives in fear of being denied. There is a mask I wear, a mask of unfazable calm. With it firmly in place, my features express serene indifference. My cheeks, eyes, lips, all are placid, welcoming, non-threatening. I convince myself that I am at ease, that I do not live as though expecting the gate to be slammed shut at any moment. This is so true of me that my friends make fun of me, say that I have the least discomfort with entitlement of any young Black woman they know. Not Rebecca, they say when talking about the anger they often feel when followed in a store, about the reluctance with which they will return something inedible to the kitchen at a restaurant, about the itchy anxiety they often feel in a room full of rich, well-educated white people. She doesn't care about all that shit, they say, shaking their heads. She does whatever she wants, gets whatever she wants when she wants it. And to some extent, this is true. My parents raised me to believe that I am entitled to whatever is available. There is no question as to whether or not my birth or my breeding merits it. This to counteract the idea that being Black or being a woman or being Jewish means having to settle for less, for the thing that is not the best, for whatever it is they are trying to give you rather than what you want. This means I have the nerve to expect admittance, service, respect. At any kind of gate, be it physically real or intellectually abstract, I assume I will be allowed to enter. If detained, I know with every cell in my being that I am ready to be indignant and that I will use whatever I have at my disposal, usually my words, but often the law, to demand access. This, the legacy of two parents who spent a great deal of their energy fighting for it. But memory is stronger than legacies, stronger than moral mandates, progressive imperatives. Even though I appear zenned out, as one friend describes me, I'm trembling. This is how memory works. It reminds me that no matter how strong I feel in myself, I am still the little girl with the legs that aren't right. I am still the little girl who is too dark or too light, too rich or too poor to be trusted. Memory works like this. I am always standing outside the gate, wanting to be let in. I am always terrified that this is where I will have to live, forever wanting, never fulfilled, always outside. And so, more often than not, I choose not to remember. But the memory doesn't disappear. It fades from the mind I know and creeps like a parasite into my soft tissue, into my muscles, into my glands. At meetings, in stores, during interviews, at dinners and lunches with friends and family, I sweat giant dark spots in powder blue shirts, and I fight a relentless urge to flee. My hands grip too tightly at steering wheels, pens, silverware. This is how memory works. I wear a mask of belonging because this is what I am supposed to do, because belonging is my birthright. But behind the mask lurks a far more mutilating truth. I am not fit. There is something wrong with me. I am not correct. The guard at the gate tells me I do not have an appointment. The wooden lever does not swing open for me. Forgetting everything I know about gatekeepers, that they merely do the dirty work, that they are not in control, I flash into a momentary rage. I demand, bomb, maim with my eyes. My gestures are sharp, contemptuous. My words strike again and again, hitting their mark like some kind of wild beast, a stallion bucking his break. At this largely routine checkpoint, I am as close to out of my body, as close to pure rage as I can be. I take giant liberties, and then just as quickly, when I have humiliated the man at the gate to the point of surrender, when the huge, now surreal lever finally does rise to let me through, I am not victorious, but ashamed. An hour later, I am still fretting. I want to go back, to get on my knees and apologize, to make myself plain. I have learned again how memory works, how unsolved fragments, hurts left intact on the body, fester still. This is how memory works. Beneath the mask, behind the cool, unperturbed exterior, there is rage. There is pure liquid fire threatening to annihilate, and I am afraid. Thank you. Thank you.
And that really brings us right back to the moment where we began, because you certainly speak for so many people with many different details of their lives when you write that way. At least you speak to me.
Thank you.
So there's about a half an hour left, and we were asked to leave that much time for people to comment or ask questions. It's a little hard to see you.
Yeah, we can't see you at all. Oh, that's so much better.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
And if you just raise your hand. If you try to talk very loud, then I won't have to repeat your question. Everyone around you can hear you. The lady back there.
I'd like to know whether you would rather have been one or the other. Would you rather have been all black? Or would you rather have been all Jewish?
Many people ask this.
What would have been better if you had been one of the other two?
You know what? I wouldn't trade my life for anything in the world. It's the ultimate paradox, because of course, the book, there's a lot of pain, but people have often asked, well, what could your parents have done differently, or should they have done anything, and really, the answer is no. I think that I've gotten there. It's the whole gift curse thing. It's that it's always double edged. And while there has been a lot of pain, there's been tremendous strength that I feel because of this experience. And I really appreciate the position that I feel I'm in as a result of the experience, which is one of really not being able to easily take one side over the other. And that's a kind of ideological, political, spiritual position that has been very empowering on a very deep level.
Yeah, I meant to suggest that it's a very privileged
Yes.
position to be in.
Yes. Yes, very interesting.
Complain about it.
Yes, this is so interesting.
All black, it would have been much worse.
You want to respond?
I really am not sure what you mean by that, but
Oh, I'm sorry, I came out wrong. I meant that you would have experienced so much pain that a black child feels all his life without the ambiguity and the moments of escape and all the rest. It's just there all the time. Racism is like this.
well, that is a huge generalization about black people, but that's okay. Many people have said to me that they feel that I've had this incredible privilege, and there's a kind of anger that creeps into their questions when they ask that, a kind of like, how dare you not talk
Complain.
about the privilege? Yeah, and why should you complain? Which is something that you just said, which is so interesting to me. As I was growing up, I truly was not granted the luxury of being able to experience it as a privilege. So I think that's something it's something that I hope that you can truly hear and understand. It was not a privilege to have to move to a different city every year, to have to change the way I moved my body, to have to change the way I spoke my English, to have to change the way I related to people in order to survive. That was not a privilege. to feel that many people in the different communities that I moved within had true out-and-out disgust and disdain for a part of my being, a part of my family, that was not a privilege. I think that it is only as an adult, as someone who can kind of philosophically and intellectually weave this story together and truly come to peace with it, that I can fully feel the privilege of it. But within this culture, it is very difficult as a young person to experience that. So I really encourage you to hear that and to kind of, sit with that for a minute. You want to call it? Yeah.
Do you want to do it?
It doesn't matter. Yes. Hi.
I love the book. It was amazing.
Thank you.
You mentioned a few times in the book that you had a diary, you had a diary or a journal.
Yeah.
And I was wondering whether you actually sat down to write this book or you were journaling, 5 or 6 years ago and you realized that there was a story that needs to be told. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your
Process.
helped this book if it did at all.
That's so interesting. A very close friend of mine sent me an email the other day saying, he was reading the book. It's been taking him forever to read the book. And I'm one of those, I'm like, why haven't you finished my book? And he was saying that for him, it felt like a journal. There was something about it that was so revealing that it felt, and of course I was kind of offended, because as a writer, a journal is very important, but it's not, it's not crafted. It's not paying attention to formal elements of structure and time and language. And so I got very mad at him, kind of. But anyway. My journal did not really play a big part in the writing of the book. The book basically started with the memory of the Bronx, when the guy gets killed, the drug dealer gets killed. That was something that I think was very unresolved in my psyche. And so when I started, that whole memory just kind of came like a bolt, into my life. And it kind of showed me like, oh, you really need to go back. And there weren't really, I didn't really use my journal. I think that I do use my journal in some ways as a place to kind of put ideas, but I don't write out passages in my journal that I put in a book. They're very different to me. I might sort of write, this is an idea for something in the journal, but actual passages, it's a whole different part of my mind. Yes.
I'm gonna probably piss some people off here.
Oh no, not.
One of the things, and I've read Jane's book, I haven't read yours, but I'd like to, but one of the reasons I'm somewhat apprehensive is that there seems to be this equation of whiteness with wealth and privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who grew up on welfare with 2 parents who were convicted felons, technically I should be black.
Wow, this is the second horrible slur against black people that's been made tonight. How could you say that? Wait a minute. How could you say that that's more typical for black people? I mean, that they would be convicted felons? That is a horrible stereotype.
Well, unfortunately, it is a stereotype, and that's my point in bringing it up.
Okay.
Is that in fact it's wrong. It's a wrong stereotype to assume that if someone's on welfare with 2 parents that are convicted felons, that they are black, because in fact they're not.
Okay, so what's your question?
That's a wrong stereotype.
Yes.
My question is that there's always an issue of class that seems to be lurking in the background.
Yes.
I lived in neighborhoods that were black, that were brown, that were white. Race was talked about. Color blindness was never an ideal. We were very aware that people with white skin had skin privilege, but we all were poor.
Yes.
And poverty, I think, and class, I think, tend to be, well,
The elephant in the room.
yeah, and
Yes.
it's the elephant in this room, unfortunately, for me.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad that you feel comfortable enough to raise it. I think it's a very important issue. I think that it's something that is very present in the book because, in fact, I think I'm very clear in the book that I'm moving between different, not only racial and cultural communities, but also very different socioeconomic communities or socioeconomically constructed communities or different classes. Um, what you're saying has also, many people have said that they have a problem with the Jewishness in the book being the whole. There's one chapter about the bar and bat mitzvahs and the kind of the financial aspects of that, and people have said, they feel that that's very problematic and stereotypical of Jewishness. My response to that is there are many different representations of Jewishness throughout the book. That is one of 4 or 5. I mean, my father starts off as a very devoted, not at all materially inclined civil rights lawyer for many years, and that's one manifestation of Jewishness. But I mean,
A civil rights lawyer, and if you're really poor, you don't get there. You don't get to that point if you're living in utter poverty or on welfare. That's pretty unlikely, that kind of mobility.
well, my grandmother, his mother, worked 6 different jobs as a bookkeeper. This is a woman who did not receive a full education, someone who worked her ass off pretty consistently so that her kids could have those kind of opportunities. Yeah. Well, I guess my response to you is I think it's a very important issue, and I think it's a very complex issue. And I tried to be as honest about it as I perceived it as a young person as I could be, and that means I raise issues of material privilege in some communities. I talk about people who don't have access in other communities. I think it's a very complex portrait of class. So I would, if you feel so inclined, I would read it before you feel such apprehension. I don't think that it's necessarily the elephant in this room. I think that it's something that is very much more on the surface than you're suggesting. What was that? Somebody else have? Go ahead. Do you want to say something? The elephant, yes. Maybe. Okay.
I'll say something about that, okay?
Yeah, do.
I just want to say something very quickly about that. I think that issues about class and issues about gender and issues about sexual choice are all extremely important issues and contexts in which many people suffer. And of course, in the human body, there are many overlaps of those issues. I think what I was trying to say, and what maybe we've been talking about tonight, is that there's also an issue in this country about race and skin color and whiteness. And sometimes, not all the time, as you say, but sometimes we have to be able to just focus on that. We can't change it and modify it every time we want to just focus on that, because it's an American phenomenon which is controlling so much of our lives. I just wanted to say that since you had referred to my book. So who else would like to speak?
Yes.
Can you speak up a little?
She hears me speaking so much about abandonment.
I just hear you speaking very, very clearly, sometimes very openly, sometimes there's a subtext about abandonment on an emotional level. And one of the questions I had is, when is the first time you felt truly recognized? What was that?
Interesting question. The question is, she hears me speaking a lot about abandonment, and sometimes that's directly speaking about it, and sometimes that's the subtext. And the question is, at what point, when did I first feel fully recognized, and what truly recognized, and what did that feel like? That is a very interesting question. I think that I think I've been in process with that. That's a long process, and I think that the most fundamental aspect of feeling truly recognized is to truly recognize myself. And I would say that I'm a total therapy addict, not addicts, but I totally believe in mental health and therapy. And I think that I started to really be able to fully recognize myself after doing a lot of therapy. And I would say the process of writing this book has helped me tremendously to do that. But I would say that it's not some one crystallized moment. It's a series of moments. And I would say that they've been more concentrated over the last, 2 or 3 years. It's been a long, hard road. In other words, yeah. Yes. It was motherhood, it was therapy, it was being in a really loving, incredible relationship. It was doing incredibly difficult work with, my closest friends. It was, finding a voice that was distinctly my own and that somehow managed to transcend all of this other stuff, in my writing. That was extremely helpful. It was, having my editor, who I really cherish, feel the power, of the words and mirror that back to me and believe in them. It was, standing up for myself in any number of ways, in any number of places, and feeling that feeling of saying like, no, this is who I am, you have to deal with all of it, and not being demolished or annihilated or falling apart, and realizing that could happen again and again, and it just got better and better and easier. But yeah, I would say that becoming a mother, I started co-parenting my son there's a big debate about how long ago, 5, Kobe? Okay, 5 years ago. And I came into his life right when he was 8, or 7, and I came into his life right around the time, at the age when my parents were divorcing. And in a lot of ways, I think that I so identified with him, I over-identified with him, and I projected my own inner child onto him. And so in many ways, raising him and being super involved in his kind of psycho-emotional life and trying to help him navigate his many different feelings and realities was a way of reparenting myself. And that was very, 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 very serious, very profound work. Really hard, though. Yes? Gender. Do I think that gender has impact? You would think that I would have some stock answer for this, right? Because this is one of the most. What do you think about that, Jane? I think that certainly. My experience as a person who is a girl person, with breasts and a vagina, has been a very specific, certain kind of experience because of that. I think that it's a little bit harder. I don't know. It seems so inextricable to me. It's hard to kind of hierarchize and separate them, The book, on any given page, in any given chapter, there's, when my ballet teacher is telling me, my butt is too big and black girls are never going to be good ballerinas anyway, race and gender are working there so tightly together, that it's hard to, split them apart. And I think that was, how I experienced my life pretty much all the time. Yes?
Growing up, did you have any other friends like yourself, or were you the only one?
That's a very interesting question. Did I have any other friends like myself, or was I the only one growing up? The friends that I did have who were mixed, this is very interesting to me, and I was just talking about this with a friend the other day. We never spoke about being mixed. it was just, and that was one of the reasons that I wanted to write the book too, because I feel like amongst us, it's something that we never talk about. It's like the great unspoken thing. You know, we'll look at each other, we'll know that something is similar. We'll be like, oh yeah, I know your story a little bit. But then that's it. We don't talk about it. So most of my friends were not. Most of my friends were either one or the other. But I did have some people, you know, but it was just we never talked about it. You know, I remember I babysat these twins who were Black and Jewish who lived right across from me in San Francisco, and it would have been the most logical thing for me to talk to their mother about it, for us to talk, you know, but we just never. It was never brought up. I think we were all so busy trying to be Black, or trying to pretend that it wasn't an issue, that we robbed ourselves of what support system we could have had, you know. Now, when I'm on the road with the book, people, you know, mixed families, you know, they're coming to the readings and they're bringing me all this literature. You know, they have this group, you know, for the kids of this age, you know, and they all know other kids, you know, and I love that. I think it'll make such a big difference in the children's lives. Yes.
Thank you for sharing with us. It's really interesting. I'm looking forward to reading your book. I haven't read it yet, but I thought a lot about these issues as the daughter of a Jewish woman and a Black man. One big difference is that my parents are still married.
Mm-hmm.
For 30 years. And I'm curious to know if you've ever separated those issues in your mind, and how much of the sort of pain and abandonment that you talked about, you know, is perhaps related to the divorce and the traveling back and forth and the separation of your family versus the issue of being a mixed child and having a Jewish father and a mother. Those things, I mean, they must be intertwined certainly to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that my experience was certainly exacerbated by the fact that my parents divorced. And I think this book in many ways is as much a narrative of a child of divorce as it is a mixed race child. I mean, it's all of those stories. I think, you know, I have always felt enormous envy for my friends who are mixed, whose parents are still together. That has always been like this sort of mystical. It's like it's the family that I could have been a part of. You know, whenever I see, I had a boyfriend in college whose parents, you know, were still together, and when I went to their house, I was just filled with this tremendous sense of like longing and deprivation, you know, like, and I thought that, you know, how lucky he was, you know, that I think that, you know, one of the biggest problems for me was that the narrative that made my body make sense was the narrative of the family, of us, the context, that story. And once that story no longer existed, I was without a story, without a narrative. And that's where a lot of the trouble came in, you know. And that's why I think the book has been so important for me. It's trying to reinscribe that narrative, the movement child narrative, from a different place and sort of restore my story. But yeah, I think that has made a big difference.
I just would like to add something here. I think that everything you've just said is something I read in the book also, but I just want to say this one thing. I think there's a danger here that we're skirting, and it would be very dangerous, I think, to leave this conversation and say, yes, well, you know, Rebecca had a split family, and she's a child of divorce, and her parents made some mistakes in the decisions that they made, and that's why there's so much pain. I think there is pain in those things, but I've been married for 30 years to the same man too, and God knows we make a million mistakes as parents all the time.
Right.
There's something about the issue of, our children are grown up now, but it's easy to look back and talk about that now. When I was writing about that pain as a young woman, it wasn't so easy. But But what I really want to say is the danger is to sort of pigeonhole Rebecca as a child of divorce and therefore erase the tremendous complexities of growing up as a person of color in this society. Obviously, if your parents are mixed race, or if your parents are people of color, and you divorce, that divorce is going to be racialized, because everything is racialized in this society. Everything. When you go out to dinner, when you send your children to camp, when you choose a school for them, when you get a babysitter, when your child's teacher calls you and says, your son is very aggressive in class, and you know that that's because he's a black son and not a white son who doing the exact same thing would be called intellectually assertive. So everything, including divorce and split families, are racialized when there's race in the picture. And when there's not race in the picture, one of the privileges of whiteness is that you don't have to think about race, but race is really in the picture there too. So I think that's a danger we have to be very, very careful of, especially in reading memoir. And there's another thing about memoir. If you are a person who is called upon to write your life, that means, almost by definition, you are a person of intense emotional experience, including the experience of pain. And something in you wants to get that pain onto the page. So you're also talking about temperament. Nobody is going to sit down and write their life in book after book or article after article who isn't motivated by a wide range of emotion, including pain. That's what I wanted to say.
That was lovely, Jane. That was so fabulous. I think that it's also important for me just to say, I think that often, the focus, because there is so much pain, that there's this sense of that being the overriding thing, and I really don't feel that way. I think that there are some very difficult experiences that I've had, but I don't necessarily feel that they're any more difficult than any other experiences that anyone else, living on the planet, growing up in this world experiences. And I think that for me, what I'm hoping that people really connect to in the book is the ability to bear witness to that pain, to honor that pain, and also the strength that comes from standing in the middle of that fire, So I really, some people have written, oh, it's, you say that you're not tragic, but it's pretty tragic, and I just really don't see it that way at all, So that's just my.
We only have time for about 2 more questions.
Oh my God, it's late, you all.
Yes.
Yes, these two here. You go first.
Congratulate you.
Thank you.
Because not only are you talking about the pain, but you're also talking about love. And so your mother and your father, they gave you all these things. I mean, being a parent, I know I have 2 girls, and I apologize for the things that I did. Not that I know exactly what I did, but I know what I did. And I told them I love her and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I think your father, your mother,
My stepmother.
all 3 of them, helped make you who you are now, who we see, and that's a praise.
Absolutely.
So wherever you came from, look what you are.
That's right. Thank you. Okay, so yes, ma'am. Oh, I thought we were going to get out without having to go there, but no. Okay, what?
Well, it seems to me that it might be somewhat intimidating to write a book that you've written.
Yeah.
And I wonder what kind of mentoring or not did you have in the process, and what were your feelings about, her sort of affirming your work or not?
Well, how long do you have? No. Let's see. How can I? address that question. I think that it's really difficult for any child of a famous parent to claim their own identity and story. I think that what often happens with famous parents is that the children's narrative is completely subsumed within the parent's narrative. And the process of extricating oneself from that is and has been for me a very arduous, constant process. So that with my first book, and the work I've done, I used to have to contractually stipulate that people not mention my mother's name when introducing me, when writing. There have been various things that I've had to do over the years to really try to deal with that. It's difficult. I think that being a writer, with a parent who's also writing, and that's something that I had to struggle with as I wrote the book a lot. I had to kind of, I kept thinking to myself, my mother's a brilliant writer, what's the point, like why should I even try to do this, kind of thing. And I finally had to think about it in terms of, dentistry or blacksmithing, like, look, if it was dentistry or if my mother was a lawyer, it wouldn't be an issue if I was, if she was a blacksmith and I was a blacksmith. It was generations of blacksmiths, and people wouldn't question it, it was just normal. Like maybe it's something in our genes, we're all blacksmiths. So that's been really helpful, just to think, maybe this is just something that my family does. My father's also a writer. He's an attorney by day, but writes plays. I think it's something that's very much been a part of the ethos of my family, and I've had to really take it out of the whole fame discourse and sort of ground it in this other discourse in order to feel more comfortable. In terms of mentoring, my mom and I don't have that kind of relationship. I think that I am a very secretive, I don't know if it's my Scorpio nature or what, but I tend to be very, I didn't show her, I don't show people my work when it's in process, and I don't show it to her, so there's not really that kind of mentor thing happening at all, no. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for coming and listening.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.